So my last take on leadership, when I teach a leadership class, a lot of the younger, less experienced leaders really appreciate the story of George Washington's ascent into leadership. And it's a pretty good book I read here, George Furling. Here's the give you an idea of the book here. Um, and in there he talks about George Washington's history. And I like George Washington as a leader because it didn't come totally natural to him. He had to work at it. He made mistakes that he had to overcome. And he was pretty successful at it. So when George was younger, he wanted to be like his half brother and be a British officer and a minor war hero that his brother was. And so he's kind of envious of his older brother and wanted to be like him, which is not a common younger guys, right? So anyway, George got himself into the position where he became head of the Virginia militia, where he's going to defend the frontier being the part of Virginia that faces the Appalachian Mountains, and he was going to defend it against Indian attacks. So he was given some colonials, so not colonial, this is pre-war, some soldiers, some locals, and they were in his little militia unit, and he was supposed to protect the farmers and such out there from the Indians, when in fact he was back at headquarters and back in the government offices and the governor's mansion trying to get himself promoted to his next job. So his troops weren't very happy with him because he was never with them. He was a couple hundred miles away, and which was a long way back then. And they were chasing Indians around in the woods and such. And George was supposed to be their leader, and he's not even there, let alone leading them. So he's an absent leader, and he's worrying about his next promotion instead of doing a good job of protecting the lives of the settlers. So not very popular. Then they get a report that a lot of the Indians had sided with the French. This is before the French and Indian War. George gets a report, or Virginia gets a report, that the French are going to come down through what's now Pennsylvania, and they're going to attack the western part of Virginia. So they give George a force of soldiers with some Indians that were on the English side to go up there and to intercept this force. So George goes up there and he finds this force coming along through the woods, and he ambushes them and engages them in a battle. The battle doesn't go quite so well. The French are really fighting back with their Indians, and George ends up retreating his fort back, and then he builds this little fort called Fort Necessity. That's kind of where the American history books usually pick it up. George is in his little fort. He builds it down in this bottom land. There's hills around it, which mean the enemy can shoot down in your fort. So it's not a very good place for a fort. It's not a very good fort. When the French and Indians surround him, and one rainy night, the Indians on his side, his allies, sneak out. They realize this is a losing proposition, so they sneak out in the middle of the night. So George wakes up in the morning with just his colonials left, and he's surrounded by these French and these Indians, and it's pouring rain, and he's outgunned, he's outmanned, and so he surrenders. So the French take him captive, and it turns out it's not a French force that's attacking. It's a diplomatic party, and the French ambassador's part of it. And in the initial ambush, George and his guys have managed to shoot and kill the ambassador's brother. So the ambassador, of course, is very upset about this, and he makes George Washington sign basically a confession that in French that says he has in fact illegally attacked a diplomatic party, and he has illegally killed the ambassador's brother. Now, the document was in French, and it was pouring raining, it was miserable conditions, and George later claimed that he didn't really understand it, that his translator wasn't very accurate at what he was signing, he barely knew what he was signing. All that may or may not be true, but basically the bottom line is that, yes, the father of our country is a confessed, I don't know if murder is the right word, maybe manslaughterer. So not so good. Later they asked the ambassador, so they sent George home in disgrace with this confession, and the French sent the confession on to the British and Virginia government. Later they asked the French ambassador, why didn't he hang George Washington right then? I mean, the guy just killed his brother, right? And he said, I didn't because I thought the English would, and I thought that would be better. Well, as you may have guessed, the English did not hang him. They knocked him out of the military for a while until the French and Indian War started up. But certainly killing the ambassador's brother did nothing to smooth things over. It may, in fact, have accelerated forces to start up the French and Indian War in the Americas. So, French-Indian War starts. George is upset because the British say, you're a colonial, you don't get to be a regular British officer, and they make him be an auxiliary, and he's not happy about that. But in battle, he does well. He learns to fight. There's a defeat, and he organizes the retreat so it's not a slaughter. He gets the wounded general, the commanding officer, off the field. The guy later dies, but George is seen by everybody as doing a good job of standing up under fire. So he gets to not only save some face, but he gets some renown for doing well. And so he comes out of the French and Indian War looking pretty good, although by some accounts, he may have accelerated the process. Now, I say accelerate because the war would have happened anyway with the economic and political forces in place in North America. But he certainly didn't do anything shooting ambassador's brother doesn't do anything for the cause of peace, that's for sure. So George learned some hard lessons, and by the time the colonial war, the Revolutionary War, is ready to start, he has learned a lot about leadership. So he shows up at the Colonial Congress, the Continental Congress, wearing his uniform. He looks an officer. He talks like an officer. It's when they're writing the Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia in July. It's really hot, end of June and July, and he wears his full uniform every day. So he looks like somebody who could be trusted to be an officer, a high-level officer. He's got some fame from his abilities during the war. So when it came time to name a head of the army, who do we have? Oh, look, here's the tall guy from Virginia who's been sitting here the whole time, and he looks like he's the most army-looking guy any of us have seen, including the only one in the room, so let's make him in charge of the army. Right, so here we have a guy, and by the way, so during the Revolutionary War, he had really learned his lesson about not being with the troops and all that, like in his early days of the colonial militia, protecting the frontier. So how many times do you think he went home during the, during the Revolutionary War? Right, think about it. How many times did George go home? The answer is none. Not once, not ever. Because he thought if the men, a lot of times it was very onerous to be away from home and be in the camps and all that, and he thought if he leaves, the men will have no excuse to stay. They could say, well, why can't I leave? Right? Our commanding officer left. And a lot of them would leave, and they would get busy with home and their lives and their families and their farms and just not come back. It was a lot harder to keep track of your troops then, and consider they're in walking distance of home, so they can literally just get up and leave one night and walk away. So George never went home during the whole war. And talk about leading, he ended up getting shot through his clothes. I believe it in 3 different times he had bullets pass through his clothes. He was never injured, but he was definitely in the thick of it any number of times. So George comes out of the war really highly expected, really highly rated and well loved by many. And so I think that's a great story of somebody who made mistakes, made serious mistakes, started a battle when it shouldn't have happened, kind of started a war a little bit, killed an ambassador's brother, big breach of international etiquette, huge, and then comes back to become the father of our country, right? And the reason I'm telling this story is in your future as a leader, you're going to make mistakes, right? We all do. There's no such thing as a leader hasn't made mistakes, including George Washington, who made some whoppers, as you now know. So after you make a mistake, you're going to feel bad about it, and you're going to think, well, maybe I'm not cut out to be a leader. And then you're going to think of George Washington, right? And you're going to think, well, I didn't start a war, I didn't kill anybody, right? So I'm better off than George Washington was, so maybe it'll be okay. And the answer is it will be okay. When you mess up, when you make a mistake, not if, but when you make a mistake, you need to use your self-confidence, use your self-image, recover from it, and also tell yourself, all right, I'm on the road to becoming a better leader. I will learn this lesson. I will figure out what I did wrong. I will not repeat it. I will get better, and I will go forward. Right? Do not take it as a sign that you're not to be a leader. Everybody is a leader at some level. Some of us better than others. Some of us have more to learn than others. Right? If you make a mistake, that puts you in very good company with the father of our country. So you can do it. Right? You just have to learn your lessons. You have to realize that you're going to make mistakes. When you're looking in the mirror, brushing your teeth, that little voice pops up in your head and says, no, see, I told you that was a bad mistake. Other people wouldn't have made that mistake. You're not a good leader. Then you can say, well, yes, I am. Think of this picture of George Washington. Right? Think of the colossal mistakes he made and think, I'm not so bad. All I did was say the wrong thing to somebody. I hurt their morale. I hurt their feelings. I made a mistake. We were a little late on something, whatever, right? I didn't start a war and nobody's dead, so I'm ahead of the game. Right? So that's sort of my leader lesson for today. Right? So this concludes chapter 13 in our book. Good luck being a leader.